My name is Andy Atkins Pogue, and I am a librarian at Cosumnes River College. And we, as a district, Los Rios District, are LibreNet members, which means that we are allowed to have more resources on our bookshelves, and we have access to some additional training and other sources available in the LibreVerse. And Delmar Larsen is the founder and does a lot of training and has office hours twice a week, every week, where that is super helpful to get questions answered. And he is going to tell us about some of the changes that have recently happened with the interface and everything that's available. And also there's going to be plenty of time for Q&A, and this is super informal. It may not even last the whole hour, but thank you all for those of you who are here today. So I'm going to throw it over to you, Delmar.
Great. So as Andy mentioned, this is super informal. In fact, I made my presentation on this sheet of paper right here that you can't see. So it's going to be a little bit more real-time activities than a formal PowerPoint presentation. So as I understand the mandate for this presentation is that you want to go over some of the things that have changed in the LibreVerse and how people use the LibreVerse over the last few months. And I understand that as things change in our infrastructure, it can be a bit confusing to people who have some comfort with the way things used to be. And I hope that at the end of this conversation, you'll agree that the changes that we did were good. And and I'll be giving you a warning that we are going to be doing more changes in the upcoming year. And this can be not just an issue with things changing here and there, and we try to give warnings out, which you should have gotten emails for telling you about. But for example, the OERI people are trying to make courses up in order to educate people, and then when I change things, they get a little feisty in terms of that. And if you know those people, you understand exactly what I'm talking about when I use the word feisty. So, anyways, let's talk about the two predominantly big things that people are wonder about. One has to do with authentication, and the other one has to do with under construction activities or infrastructure. So did I share the screen? I'm not sure if I did. Okay, I did. Okay, so I'm importing a few books here, so I'm going to go through here. Okay, so when I give my presentations out, my formal presentations, I try not to throw out URLs everywhere, but the LibreVerse has lots of URLs. We've introduced the Launchpad. Anything you see a little rocket ship on here, you click on this and it'll go to the Launchpad, and it's a map of the LibreVerse.
Hey, Delmar, we're seeing your desktop, not, is that what we're supposed to be seeing?
No. Oh, yeah, okay, I'm sorry. Somehow I screwed up my screens, and what was one is two and two is one, and I wasn't paying attention to this. So you should be able to see this thing here. Let me bounce back here. And I was saying, anytime you see a little rocket ship, and we have rocket ships on our libraries and in most of the parts of the LibreVerse now, you can click on it and it'll pull up the LibreVerse right here. It has a series of the applications, so the principal components that you use the LibreVerse to address certain niches. And then you have the 16 libraries right here, although I'm not entirely sure. Okay, and I have a 16th one, the 17th one, which is our development site that you guys don't see, where we do stuff and test it out and things like that. So anyways, so this is convenient because if people want to have a single URL in order to go to it, it's one.libretext.org/home, but really it's launchpad.libretext.org will go to it. And that's what I like to write down to people in order to be able to go for that. So as you can see, we have our adapt, comments, and conductor. That's the same technology, but it's split into two halves. One's the public half and one's the private half, one requiring signing in to get to. The Jupyter Notebook system, which I don't think your campus or your district uses, which has interactive code that you can embed into your book, R, Octave, Python, etc. Project Nova is our version of the Campus Commons. but in this case here it's agnostic, so that we can actually provide our infrastructure to campuses that don't adopt Canvas. And you'll be surprised to hear that there are campuses out there that have not adopted Canvas. And I will guarantee that your campus or your district will change from Canvas at some point in the future. So we have a strong preference to avoid tying in our infrastructure into learning management systems. And Studio, which is the repository that we have generated for H5P infrastructure, it's part of Adapt, but many people like to use it directly because it's convenient and useful. And the other parts of Adapt, like our iMath AS server, which is like MyOpenMath, and our WebWorks server, few people access, but they are available. So anyways, this is one thing in order to keep in mind. We released this, I think, in November or December of last year, along with the development or the introduction of this Launchpad was changing our authentication infrastructure. Now, I don't know any district that's as, let me find the right adjective here, complicated as your district is with email addresses. And that has caused lots of issues for us. So the primary issue is that you have an instructor come in and they create an account with a specific email address, and that email address is an alias for a different email address that's supposed to come in the W number. So they don't sign in with the W number. So then they get their accounts and they try to register or sign in with their alias, and Microsoft comes back and says they don't recognize. They come back with a different email address. So we're not able to choreograph this. And since you have local ones, district ones, APP, I'm not sure what that is, other aliases. And I at one point I saw 7 to 8 email addresses that you guys had. In order to help address that, and we haven't fully addressed it, the convenience, but we are going to be doing that soon, is we introduced the LibreOne infrastructure. It's a single sign-on technology, such that it's one account that's meant in order to be useful across all the parts of the LibreVerse. Is roughly like that. It doesn't have Adapt integrated into it yet, but it will. Jupyter and Nova are not integrated into it either, but it will very soon, so that we only have to deal with one account. Now, that being said, that doesn't affect, or that doesn't help a lot the example I talked about before. The update that we're planning on doing sometime in the next month or 6 weeks is to make it so that every user has a single starting local account. That means that you register on our servers. And then if you have any other secondary accounts, like through Los Rios's single sign-on or so, they basically are registered as part of our primary LibreText or native LibreText account. And that makes it easier for us across the board, because you'll always have your primary account that you can log into and access and see everything. And all the secondary ones are effectively aliases onto that. That will be coming out soon. So that means that people cannot make accounts up that, the first account that person makes will be a local account where we are the ones that host the password. And then any other secondary account can be on any other campus's side that's hooked into Microsoft Active Directory or Google's OAuth infrastructure. So anyways, people can register for an account at one.libretext.org. Since I'm signed in, it's going to look slightly, it just goes straight to here. But if I'm not signed in, which I can do right here, it will come with the registration option right here, register for a LibreOne account. And that is what I give to people as the first step. You need a LibreOne account before you can do anything, period, exclamation point, end of time, end of line, whatever you want to call it. So that is one of the key components off of that. That gives us control over everybody to understand things in a better way than we used to, and it provides a centralized infrastructure. So as soon as we make an account up, you're ready to go. Account generation is sort of a 3-step process. Step 1 is when someone comes in and requests an account, they sign in their email address and say, I would like a code. We do that because we don't want to have bots and other things coming in and gumming up our system, which we've had in the past. Once they get a code, then the instructor goes through and just completes a couple metadata or a couple requests for metadata or information, asking them who they are, what campus they're associated with, what parts of the LibreVerse they want to have access to, although by default we give everybody editing rights on the libraries and most of the LibreVerse here, Commons and Conductor, for example, in Studio. At that point, then it goes into our team that verifies the account, because we want to manually verify every account to make sure that it is truly, in fact, a instructor that we have verified it. There are several reasons for doing so. The primary reason one can envision is that there are materials on our site that we don't want non-instructors to see. For example, the homework infrastructure doesn't adapt. If the homework infrastructure were openly available, all the questions would be on Course Hero and Chegg, and then it would lose its integrity as a homework infrastructure. So we verify this. This is not too dissimilar from the way MyOpenMath, for example, does it for their infrastructure. It's not uncommon that faculty stop in the middle of that three-step process or just stop. So we have incomplete or unverified accounts. We're working on ways in order to poke the people in order to make sure that they don't keep it as unverified, because when they're unverified, they don't have all the access that they want, but they may think that they're supposed to have all the access that they want. Anyways, I'm digressing or at least expanding a little bit off here. We're very happy with where Libre 1 is going, and we're going to be doing a bit more advanced work for that in the near future. So the other big issue is the demise of the sandbox. So let's talk about that. So I'm going to go to chemistry. The way that we had things for the last 5 to 6 years is that when people get accounts on a library, this is mine, and mine is a little bit more advanced. I see a few things here that the average person doesn't see. They get a private sandbox that they can then create and build their content on, separate from anyone else's content. So it's a protected area in order to make it so they don't interfere with the rest of the infrastructure. We used to have things open, and that caused chaos at some point for a variety of reasons. For example, people were using the LibreTexts for advertising for erectile dysfunction drugs or for Bollywood videos or other things like that. So we locked it off, made sandboxes, and that worked reasonably well. However, we had a few issues back and forth in terms of accessing sandboxes and people learning about how to use sandboxes effectively for building books and things like that. And what we decided to do was to deactivate private sandboxes and introduce a new concept, which we call Workbench. Now, Workbench is just basically one big sandbox. We want to have a different name for it, and we still have some old sandboxes that we're going through in order to clean up. But the idea is that every temporary project has an entry in the Workbench. We can keep it all centralized. We know what projects are there, and then when a project is ready to be published, we can move it from the Workbench into their respective bookshelf, whether it's campus bookshelf or essential bookshelves. People don't access the Workbench under their name. We used to have the sandbox right here, but we no longer access this. So this is the bigger change off of it, is that the projects that are stored in the Workbench are only accessed via the conductor page. So now the workflow for a typical project is you create and I have a link down here. I can have this list to you later on today. You create an account. Okay. Once you create an account, you'll have access to the conductor version, the conductor page. The conductor page is the project management tools for building projects. And the rule that we have now is that you can't build a textbook without having a conductor page, period. And the conductor page, if you haven't seen it, is the only OER focused project management tool out there. We tried several other enterprise level versions of that, but we didn't like the cost or we didn't like the infrastructure, so we built our own. And this is what a typical conductor page looks like. We changed the looks a little bit. We'll augment it a bit here and there. It has team members, it has notes, it has discussions. We've been working a lot on expanding the files or the assets. This is in part with a collaboration with the California Education and Learning Lab for their repository of content. And we also have tasks, which are no tasks shown on this specific project there. The issue that we have here is now we have the textbook link that goes to the book that's connected to the conductor page. So the conductor page, every project has a conductor page, but a conductor page may not have a LibreText library connected to it. Let me rephrase that. The conductor page is separate from the project page. You make the conductor page to begin with, you give the details, you add the team members, you make it useful, and then you can create a book and it gets automatically connected to your conductor page. And the way you go about doing that, it's probably just be better for me to, is you have this big green button that says create a project. You click on it and I can say test Sacramento Rocks. It's a beautiful title. I'm going to make it private. And it creates this empty page, which is largely empty. At that point, there's this create book here that's blue. It's going to turn to green in order to make it synced up to the other things. And if I press this button, it will create an automatic template for building a book in our workbench and tie it to this conductor page. So that's the next step off. Now, the reason that it doesn't create that automatically when you create the conductor page is that there are other projects out there that are not necessarily focused on building textbooks. For example, ancillary materials or question banks or other things like that. You can still use the conductor page in order to organize those things, facilitate communication, and do everything that the conductor page used to do. And I'm assuming that you guys have some familiarity with it, so I don't need to go to the bigger picture off of it. But this is a mechanism in order to tie in a book. When you do that, I'm going to say this is going into chemistry. I'm going to create, and then it's going to create this template that's in the workbench of the book, which has the front matter, the back matter, and an empty page or empty chapter off of it. So it's a default book in order to work off of that you have to start with, all formulated with all those things in place. And now I have a link here. If I click on here, it'll go to the book that I have in place. That workflow is consistent, meaning that everybody has to go through that procedure. You cannot make a textbook without making a conductor page, and you make the textbook through your conductor page. So the conductor is meant to be a central infrastructure of tools, and we're going to slowly merge technologies into the conductor page. We've already done that with the remixer, which is now under more tools. It will be more transparent soon, that you can click on. And when you clicked on the remixer, it will automatically pull up the book. So in contrast to how the remixer used to be, where you had to find the book or pull it in, this one here will pull it in automatically and give the ability in order to start remixing immediately. There we go. So we're going to accelerate it a little bit so you can come in and start remixing without having to find it, without having to teach people about the different aspects associated. We've removed the new book option in the remixer, which we used to have as the first step. So that was a option right here. That's completely missing. Right now, if you just use the remixer in the conductor page, it pulls up the book right here and you're ready to start remixing without thinking off of it. We're going to update the remixer soon in order to change the style and a few things off of it, but it'll have the same functionality. And this right here helps to remove the barrier for using remixing and make it easier in order to capitalize on the portfolio or the corpus of content that we have. So anyways, I digress. So when a book is compiled, which means published, it will now have three sort of URLs connected to it. It'll have the project page, which is the book that you can access. It'll have the conductor page, which is the back page that only members on the team have access to. And it will have a commons page, where the commons page is the compiled front end that you can access on the commons side. So the cataloging system that you have available. And they're all three connected, depending upon if you want to showcase the catalog, showcase the book, or have access to the commons page. it's a little complicated than just having it all one project, because each one is meant for a specific feature or a different specific aspect of things. So that's one of the biggest confusing things that people have that are comfortable using sandboxes. The people who have not been exposed to sandboxes then don't know what they're losing, and they don't tend to have a problem with this. Uh, like I said, more of the advanced features will be put into the conductor page. For example, the ability in order to change author bars will be put on here, manipulating glossaries and doing a handful of other things, which are probably not overly important right now. One thing I will mention, and I'm not sure if your campus or your district had this too much, but we used to have the concept of team sandboxes, where we would create a sandbox that multiple people would be able to come in and use and remix from effectively. We got rid of that because it was unnecessary with this new conductor page. Every member of the team here then gets editing rights on the book, period. So it's up to the administrators or even the people who do it to add and subtract people as they want in order to have access to their book. And that's it. So no longer are we doing team sandboxes. No longer do people ask us in order to create team sandboxes and make groups and do all a bunch of stuff. It's all handled automatically here. Part of the reason that we do this stuff is also to make my life easier, just to be honest. But by having a consistent workflow, it means that you then are empowered in order to be able to change these things without having to worry about getting a hold of us, and I might be gone, or some other things, and not having access to these sort of things. Okay, team sandboxes. I mentioned the templates, remixer, no team sandboxes. So is that pretty straightforward to you guys? So again, can't do anything until you make a conductor page. And then from the conductor page, you can make a link. If you're making some other ancillary materials, I think you could put them in the files. When you add things to the files, they are then searchable on the Commons front end. So the Commons front end has changed a little bit to show you access to books, but you can also do access on assets. So you can say, let me look at a PowerPoint file dealing with chemistry. And if I put it in the search right here, and I can look at the chemistry files that are PowerPoint files. These are largely PostScript files that I think are coming from the Learning Lab, California Education Learning Lab stuff. They've dumped a lot of things into here. Now you can see some PowerPoint files from OpenStax. You can get a folder to answers to specific things. Individuals have access to only the files that they are supposed to have access to. So each file that you've uploaded, let me grab something that's actually there. Let's say I'm going to upload a file. That one there. I have the ability, in order to change access to all people in the world, can find it in the Commons. Only people who have accounts, only people who have on conductor accounts, only people who are verified instructors, which are the ones that we go through, or only team members on the team in order to be able to do that. So it gives you ability in order to control, and says you've created a resource, but you only want instructors to see it. And you rely on us in order to verify the instructors, because we go through it carefully, and it takes sometimes between 24 to 48 hours in order to verify an account after being requested. So in this case here, these things here are available for everybody that's connected to it. When you actually do this and you add these to your conductor page, they'll then be reflected on your Commons page. But it needs to be compiled. So let me go to green chemistry, just because I remember this is the case. So this is a textbook on green chemistry. This individual has made PowerPoint presentations for all the chapters. If I were to view the Commons page, I then can see that there are assets here where I can go through and see the PowerPoint files connected to the book. So the idea is to have the assets next to the book. This will also be reflected on the book itself when you go to the book once we actually tweak up some things, but that's going to be a month or two before we actually get that in place. And such. So that's that. Any questions about this? It's pretty straightforward. No one has chimed in to say this is a completely bad idea. I need to go back to sandboxes.
Delmar, I actually have a question.
Okay.
So are you also able to link like adapt resources to a project?
Yeah. So when you go to a project, if the adapt course is public, so you have to go into adapt or anonymous, you have to see an entry off of here. You can then paste that URL here, and it will be automatically connected to the conductor page, commons page, just like assets are. So it will tell instructors, it says there are assets and here's homework connected to it, but you need to sign in order to be able to see that homework because it's on adapt and we have protections behind it. And this is not one of them. I can try to find one quickly in order to demonstrate that, but it's largely an entry right here that says there's homework connected to it right below assets or other things that are connected to it. Again, let me know if you want to see that in action. I can try to remember one that pulls up. Dipali?
Thank you, Delmar. So I was curious. Thank you, wonderful presentation, and I absolutely love you and your team have put in so much effort for over the years. So I have my few courses on LibreTexts already. With the last name is Butch, you might see in business area, and your team has helped me and supported me when I was compiling all the resources before, and of course all librarians everywhere. So thank you, Andy and everybody. I wanted to know that whatever efforts that we have made as a faculty to compile all this OER material in LibreTexts over last few years, and they are already in Canvas. So do you think that, and you mentioned that a lot of changes are coming. So do you think that faculty will have to include all these resources in the new system, or how is it going to affect?
Well, I mean, part of the issues that we have here is that we don't have a very narrow scope. If we were like Pressbooks, it's very clear this, okay, this is all you can do. You can just print up off of this thing and that's that. Okay. And that would makes life easier. However, the grand scheme of what we're trying to do is to provide an infrastructure to take the place of the commercial publisher in the classroom, which means you need the textbook, you need the homework, you need the ancillary materials, you need the question banks, you need everything in order to break the golden handcuffs across the room. And that leads to complexity. It takes a bit of time, and different technologies are necessary to handle different things. So there's a bit of we're constantly developing and honing it as we try to figure out how to work, how technologies become available, how we start to do it. So that's where we have. Now, when you say things are embedded into Canvas, they are not necessarily, if they're from our platform, they're mostly not stored in Canvas. They're just a thin common cartridge, and they are brought in. Right.
Yeah, link. Yes.
A link or iframed in. That provides maximum flexibility in terms of updating on our site, and it reflects on your book, and you don't need to do that. And we have similar technology that we put in place for the homework system in order to be able to do that. Requires more advanced API control, which I'm not sure if your district has actually approved that, versus just simple LTI. I'm not entirely sure you guys have asked for that, but at some point you guys will be, because it makes faculty's lives a lot easier.
Yeah, I did give district DOIT a heads up about it. The last time you and I talked about it, Delmar, it wasn't completely operational yet. So is it now available?
Yeah, it's operational. We're fine-tuning different things. So for the intended goal of this is that when, I'm sorry to digress from your issue, Dipali, I'll get back to it in a moment, is that in Adapt, if you just use LTI, you have to create an assignment in Canvas, make a date, a time, points, and then link to the assignment in Adapt. Well, that's fine and dandy if you have 5, maybe 10 of them. But if you look at, for example, the Spanish collection that the OER has, it's 50 plus of them. So invariably, a faculty member is going to A, get tired, B, make a mistake, and it just is really an annoying situation and reduces adoption. So we made an API infrastructure that you can come in as instructor if you get formal approval from the campus administrator, and you can just basically say, this is my adapt course, this is my Canvas course, press a button, and then we go in and we create all the assignments, create all the question numbers, all the points, all the dates, and then link them all up automatically. That works fine. We're having issues right now in terms of more advanced things of people who are trying to, what happens if you take a Canvas course and you duplicate it, but then they want it to still be hooked into a new adapt course. So it's like, okay, well, you can duplicate this, but then resyncing it requires a different type of logic. And that's when we're experiencing issues with Canvas, because Canvas doesn't always tell us what we're allowed to do. Let me phrase that. Canvas's documentation is pretty bad. I can document that both from a developer, and we also have our own version of Canvas. We're running an open source version on our system for testing and linking things up off of it. And it really was one of the biggest pain in the rears in order to be able to put in place off of there. But that's a back end. Faculty don't necessarily need to do this. But anyways, so yes, right now I would recommend signing up for it and using it. It makes your life a lot easier for creating these things and making it work. And the more advanced things, we're working with largely Maricopa Community College in order to be able to facilitate that, because they want an infrastructure in place in order to be able to have people sort of handle adjunct classes so that they can coordinate, make what we call alpha beta, would be old-fashioned master-slave based approaches, and go through lots of tricks and things like that. That is far beyond what I've seen any OER project do. But commercial infrastructures like Connect and such, they do those sort of things. So if we're going to take the place, we need to build that sort of infrastructure. It's taking us a while in order to figure out what Canvas does. And why Canvas doesn't do it, and why they don't want to help us. When we identify a bug, they go, and then they move on. It's just like, okay. So that's the upshot. If you want more details, I can certainly give them to you if you like.
Yeah, last time I was communicating with Eric Keene. Is that who I should contact for follow-up, or should I contact Eric?
I mean, the ideal case is you have your Canvas administrator contact Eric Keene, and he will then give the API keys and says, this is what we need permission in order to be able to do that. Everything else cannot be there. I mean, if you're not familiar with this idea, that the protections of LTI is largely implemented by removing permissions. So that when you use LTI as the interface between an external vendor, being us, and an LMS, Canvas in this case here, you're only allowed to do a few things. You're allowed to push a grade. You're allowed to get a roster. That's 1.3 gave you that. And that's it. That's all you're allowed to do. It used to be before you had more, and that was abused and had lots of protections and things like that. Now, the issue is if you want to do more than just those two things, like what I was talking about this, you need to request permission, have API access, and go through that stuff. There's lots of hoops in order to jump through. Anyways, I digress. So Dipali, we were talking about
yeah, thank you, Delmar. Since you were already talking about API, sorry. I'm thinking about AI because there's too much AI going on.
There's a lot of AI out
Please
there. Yes.
Pardon me. Yes.
And there's a lot of hyperbole. I'm waiting to find out what's actually real and what's just babbling, but yes.
So what, since Andy and you were talking about, and our district having permission, Los Rios district, what I heard or I have felt from the courses before, that if there are Cengage and McGraw-Hill and other similar things that were added in some of the faculty's courses, could create some accessibility issues for students, because
if you do anything, you always have accessibility issues, just across the board.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if LibreTexts is trying to do similar things like Cengage and McGraw-Hill and adding those LibreTexts textbook in faculty courses. Of course, it's open and everything, but there's another layer where administrators from the district would and then you need to add that every single semester. And that can create little problem or something that I was just very curious. And also, when I add in my Canvas links, LibreTexts, in my courses, all the LibreTexts links, I think it helps solve a little bit of accessibility problem, because if students say, and I add my own content, because all LibreTexts and all the course subject matter, we don't have so much of information yet when we create or compile our courses to student learning outcomes from each college or each courses. So we still have to create our own and share to students in our own online courses or anywhere. Also, there's other
Okay,
question about,
the amount of things to address is growing here, and I want to make sure I address them before I forget again.
Thank you.
So in terms of adding things to courses, I'm not entirely sure the context you're talking about beyond making sort of a primary course that you can iframe things into. The bigger issue might be that you want a course that is already prepared, that has all your textbook, all your homework, and that you can just duplicate and hand out to adjunct faculty and run off of there. And that is what part of that API advanced thing that Andy was talking about that we put in place. One of the things that we're planning on doing is, as part of that project Nova, which is on the launch pad, is that it will store a course that you can download, and will have the book, and it will have the homework, and you tie the homework to a specific existing homework assignment that you need to import, and you can basically have it all put together in addition to any assets that you may want to have in their files or things like that. But that by itself is just organizing that, right? That doesn't change accessibility issues. So, we take accessibility very seriously across everything. But again, accessibility is a spectrum. There's no such thing as 100% accessible or 100% inaccessible. You have to give a description of what you're doing, where you're going, how we're advancing, and such like that. And as long as people are reasonable, and unfortunately not everyone is reasonable in this landscape, everyone is able to move forward. Adapt is well designed in order to handle that sort of thing, with ancillary technologies for people who require that, where the primary technologies are not good. The biggest issue that we have for accessibility in the LibreVerse is H5P. H5P is really difficult in order to do. So as long as you have an ancillary backup off of it, you can use H5P effectively, or you use just a very limited part of H5P. And that gets into gets back into the, I'm sorry, I just was reading the chat and Richard said something silly, so you can blame him. So anyways, depending upon what aspect of accessibility we need matter, but we have requirements in order to be WCAG 2.1 compatible. We go through various infrastructures in order to do that. ADAPT's grant with the state of California has money set aside in order to facilitate that, updating ACRs and other things in order to address that. Anyways, that was the first part of your question. Then you started to go into something else, which I can't quite remember now.
Yeah, please, that's fine.
Okay.
Because of OER and you are here available, so there are too many questions, but no, thank you so much for answering all the questions.
Okay.
And there are so many folks here in the Zoom, so if anybody else need to ask questions, so please feel free to.
Well,
thank you so much.
Let me mention
I just, while you're looking for something, Delmar, I just want to add to the accessibility conversation that it's true that the accessibility of ADAPT did come up when we were first asking for the LTI. And part of the thing was that ADAPT was very transparent with the areas that had potential problems, but also instructed that if you're using the H5P and Studio, you need to know that you're going to have an alternative for students who might need that. And that was sort of a red flag initially for our DOIT folks, but then I got the distance education folks on board who said, you know what, the same exact thing is happening with McGraw-Hill and Pearson and all of these other things. They're just not upfront about it. And so there was some back and forth, and we were able to get the LTI approved. And I think it will be the same type of thing with the API, just making the argument that it's just going to make life so much easier than trying to. The other thing about the LTI is you have to recreate it every single semester, which is the thing that is the biggest stumbling block, I think.
Yeah. Well, the API can do that. There are some things you can do, like you can generate a sort of common cartridge dump of the course that you can then bring in and such like that, but you need to tie things together. It's kind of messy. I've been looking a little bit. I was actually interacting with Roy Simpson from your Cosumnes River College a couple days ago in terms of seeing how iMath, MyOpenMath does it. And they have a different approach, which is in some cases more flexible, but in other cases less flexible than what we have in place. So, but anyways, let me digress to this other big thing that I strongly recommend, and I'm not sure if Andy has used it, but I encourage it greatly. So the conductor page is designed to facilitate communication. And by facilitating communication, the intent, again, I'm being greedy here, is meant in order to help reduce the communication with me. So I do want to bring up one thing, that is this button right here called My Alerts. When you go to the conductor page and you have My Alerts, you can actually select and say you want to deal with something that has all project books and homework, for example, that has the word calculus on it. So when a new resource comes into our LibreVerse with that specific meta tag, I will get an email notifying it. So it's clear that if you're actually focusing on a specific topic and you want to know if something's coming in that you may want to be able to capitalize on, integrate in, and move forward, this is a great opportunity or a great mechanism in order to facilitate that. And I strongly encourage people to do that for their specific fields. Now, I'm going to delete that. Now, along the same theme of communication, is that anyone who has emailed me in the last couple of years understands that I don't tend to email very quickly back. My inboxes have sometimes, like when I came back from Switzerland, exceeded 900 after triaging, and I still haven't gotten it down to below 400 right now, people. So we are working on ways, or we're addressing ways in order to try to expand that. So the greater LibreTexts team is able to handle many of these questions if they can. So we introduced a new ticketing system for our customer support of sorts. And Andy, did you use this at all yet?
I have used it, yeah.
So there's a little button up here that says customer support, or sorry, support center. Whatever. If you click on it, this right here shows everybody's support center. So, but in your case here, it's not. If you click on this question mark, it will pop up with a modal that you can use to submit a ticket. And this is really convenient. And we ask people to do this in order to handle anything that's not information related. Like, I would like to have you to do this or something like that. This is, I have a technical issue. I have a feature request, I have an account issue, I have a bookstore issue, I have an issue integrating with LibreText content, other, and then this comes in on our side, and then we're able to triage it to different parts of the LibreVerse, because, not the LibreVerse, the LibreText development team, because there's more than just me on the team, as many of you know, and then right now we have a lot of tickets going through. Many of them are low level for us to be able to address when the time comes, but it's a convenient mechanism in order to ensure that requests don't get lost. They may not necessarily be addressed super fast, depending upon the priority, but it does provide a mechanism that we can go through and address them and facilitate communication behind that. And I'm going to pull up one that might be worthwhile.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to go to.
So this right here is a technical request that was internal. I made it and I assigned it to a few people. That's on place here.
If
Can I can't, yes, okay, good. So then there's a communication between the original person and the development team and anyone who's assigned to it, internal conversations. You can submit files in order to review things, get activity feeds and such. It's everything that we want in order to be able to compartmentalize the conversation and facilitate bringing more people onto the board, onto the ticket, and move it forward. It's basically a standard ticketing system, but instead of paying for one, we have it integrated directly into Commons and Conductor. I encourage you to go through that. When people are submitting requests right now, we are sending responses back to people. If they submit requests via email, we ask them to go and submit a ticket, and we tell them that in order to make our lives a lot easier so that other people on my team can come in and start to address them and move forward and do that sort of stuff. If a Libre One campus or district has a case manager, which you guys do not, then the case manager uses this as a mechanism in order to communicate with the administrators off of that. And that's like bigger systems like Kansas and Florida is talking about that, and Illinois and other things like that. But anyways, those are the biggest issues that we have in place. There are lots of little small things that happen from time to time that we are working on advancing. But these are the ones that people have an issue in here. So I can address any more questions. I do have a list of the future changes that are going to come around in case you guys want to know a little bit about where we're going in the immediate future. It's up to you about how you guys would like to spend the next 12 minutes for. I do have a hard stop. I have to leave at 1 o'clock for another meeting though. How would you guys like to proceed? Yes, Dipali.
If nobody else has question, as I understand that whatever currently is in LibreVerse is still going to be there, right? As of now, the courses that I've compiled and put it. If you
Oh yeah. I mean,
business.
We don't call courses or books or anything like that.
Okay, great.
Unless there's a request in order to do that. When we do a request, we move it from production into a special area that you don't see, but you have access to. So if you have a book that's transcluded to it, that it then preserves the integrity of it. We call that area purgatory. We could probably come up with a better term for it, but it's essentially meant a special area separate from everything else that's in there.
Okay, wonderful. Because I want to make sure that I don't have to change anything in my LibreText for upcoming semester. Yeah, thank you.
We don't get involved in your LibreText. The only curation efforts that we do on books that are on campus bookshelves is accessibility purposes. When we need to be able to go through and address this and address that at different points. Like for example, last week I was down at Fresno doing a couple-day workshop, and one of the faculty members running that mentioned that they had paid their daughter in order to go through and change the headings on every block because an accessibility person said they needed to be H2. We use it as H5 heading, and we have a designated description saying that this is how you use it, so it's all perfectly fine for accessibility purposes. So they spent many hours fixing something that didn't need to be placed. I can go in and I can actually just type in a couple terms and do it all bulk changes using what's called regular expressions and global finds and replaces and things like that. So we do that. We use that same technology in order to address issues that people may have for accessibility or updating or identifying if there's alt text missing or other things like that in order to advance what's going on. We want everything to be accessible. We also understand that that takes a bit of time in order to advance, but we're steadily moving forward, and I'm very happy with the progress that we're making so far. So don't worry about things going away. We don't delete them. Any other questions? Okay, well, I'll just talk about a few things here, and I don't have graphical descriptions in order to do that. One of the requests that we had from Arizona, Maricopa Community College District, was to make it so the administrators then had access so it's actually several multi-pronged things. So one is when a faculty member from that campus, or in this case, 9 campuses, generate a project, the administrator would be informed of the project or would be added to the project as a liaison or a lead. And that's just meant for them to keep track of what projects are made within their infrastructure. And I understand that that's a desire. They also want to be able to provide a mechanism of the list of everyone who is from their spheres of influence that has created accounts, and also being able to identify all the projects that are connected within their sphere of influence, just so they have a bigger picture of who's making projects, who's moving projects, and how things are advancing within their part of the LibreText infrastructure. And that should be available sometime soon. It's not really that big of a deal. We just need to polish things up a little bit. I mentioned administration. No, I actually said the same thing. Authorship. So one of the issues that people have had in the past is to request more control over the authorship of pages. So that would oftentimes take a little bit of a process in order to implement, because I need to go through and do a few things that's back in handwritten. But we're going to be making that integrated into Conductor sometime before the end of this academic year. So you can start to add in names and orders and things for specific tags that you can assign to books, or assign to chapters, or assign to pages of them, without requiring us in order to be able to manually put it in place. We may need some verification in order to make it not get unwieldy with lots of junk and misspellings and things like that. So it's actually a centralized infrastructure that's out there. We've had a request in order to make it so that when people add people to a project, that the initial section here would be only those team members that are from the LibreNet campus. So in our case, you're four campuses. Sorry, keep missing out how many campuses on every district. So that you can say, well, these are the ones that are within your district, and then you can click on it and see here are everyone else that's outside of your district, just to make life a little bit easier for people. The thing that I'm particularly excited about, that people have talked to me about, what's the next big expansion that we're going to be doing, and I just got approval from the Learning Lab to use some funds in order to do this, and that's to have a video repository. We wanted to have a video repository for a long time because we didn't feel that YouTube was a very good solution for storing of videos. Not only is it bad because it introduces ads if you don't have ad blocker, and now they're attacking ad blockers, so that it may be a situation even ad blockers are not going to do that. Nothing breaks studying more than having to sit through a minute of ads in order to be able to go through. Fortunately, the ads are not erectile dysfunction ads, but who knows where things are going to go in the future that's out there. So by having our own video repository that we're able to stream, it's a very different technology than much of the other parts of the LibreVerse. We then have a control over the videos. And this only applies to the videos that we have the ability in order to host, ones that the owners or the intellectual property owners give us rights in order to be able to host for them. And a lot of videos that are on YouTube are not like that. They're not Creative Commons. They are open access based version. We'll be able to host. It also gives us the ability to have better control over the transcripts. And this goes back to accessibility purposes. So YouTube, if you don't own it, you have no ability in order to change the transcript or to improve the transcript. You have to accept the one that's there, which may or may not be terribly good for you. And this gives us the ability in order to control that. And we're very happy about that capability. And then it obviously gives us a central repository in order to be able to do a search through openly licensed videos that people can access and showcase for their respective constituents. I'll skip over the glossary because that's we're continually advancing ADAPT. So again, the state of California has given us $1 million a year in order to advance ADAPT in STEM fields. And we almost got another couple $1 million from the federal government last year. Again, thanks to your district as being a member of that, in order to advance non-STEM fields, because while we can all agree chemistry is the best field that people should be studying, we also understand there's a need for homework outside of STEM fields. But anyways, we're doing constant advances off of that, and I'm happy to discuss that in more detail. What has been a bane in our side for a while has been our batching. Our batching infrastructure is the infrastructure we use in order to generate PDFs. It also generates our common cartridge. It generates our zip files of PDFs of every file, compiled it. It will generate our EPUB and a few other things off of that. And the issue that we had is that we have grown in size compared to the infrastructure we had in place, and it's sometimes choking on us. And we need to even update it with additional things like flattening, for example, for PDFs in order to avoid issues with transparencies and other things that people have. That's some technical issues, but we more importantly need to build a infrastructure that is dynamic and can handle a large level, lots of different servers in order to handle the need that comes up, and to expand it to the EPUB, because we have relied on EPUB as the principal export option for our resources in order to handle ADA requirements for it, because the PDFs are not accessible. We know that. We don't intend to ever make the PDFs accessible. They're not a really good platform at all for doing so. And we're going to rely on EPUB, which is largely wrapping up the page into a package and sending it out. Part of that infrastructure will be updating our bookstore. So for the people who purchase the bookstore or purchase books from our bookstore, we operate this bookstore as a service to the community. We operate at near cost. We put a 16% markup in order to handle hosting and organization and such. Otherwise, everything goes to the printer in order to print and ship those things. We have had, we needed to update this for a while in order to allow people to make carts and organize how many books they want. We have campuses that have been requesting bulk orders. Oftentimes, for example, in prison campuses that handle student, whatever. They oftentimes order $10,000 plus in books, and it can get a little unwieldy on everyone's side in order to handle that effectively. And we need to update that so it doesn't need to handle it. I mentioned the EPUBs. One of the last things that's going to be part of this is something I've been interested in pursuing for a while. We introduced a concept at 6 years ago called LibreTexts in a box, and it provided an opportunity in order to load up the repository of questions, not questions, of content on our libraries onto a Raspberry Pi box, which can operate as a hotspot outside of high-speed internet. So in other words, students that don't have access to high-speed internet, either because the infrastructure is not in place or because they don't have money in order to access it, could then use the Raspberry Pi box in order to be able to dump that. However, technology has advanced a bit such that we are pursuing now LibreTexts in the phone. So you can actually download a book or a library, maybe not necessarily all libraries, although that might be possible, into a phone that you can use in order to be able to read your book, even if you happen to be 10,000 leagues under the sea, or you're in a country that has limited internet access to things. We discovered that while this was meant in order to pursue students in developing countries, that the pandemic demonstrated that there were a lot of student populations that had limited access to high-speed internet in America, even in our own area here. I think Sac City, for example, I'm not sure it extended to all the colleges. They had their students would drive in and load up their textbooks or materials on their campus and then go back and submit scores and grades that way. So anyways, that's going to be part of our phone app infrastructure. We're going to be releasing our phone app for Adapt very soon. This also gives the opportunity in order to use Adapt as in-class clickers. So you can actually have a polling infrastructure in place between to facilitate greater communication with your class. I know with small classes that's less important, and let me phrase that, it's not less important, it's easier in order to do. However, when I have 500 student classes like here at UC Davis, it's the only mechanism that I needed to do. that's a short upshot of what's going on. You should be getting our newsletters. And Jennifer Rogers is now being very fastidious in order to make sure that we have our newsletters out every month to give people an idea about what we're doing, where we're going, and how things are advancing. So unless you have any questions off of this, I need to jump to
Yeah,
a new meeting.
That was great. Some exciting stuff happening. I get the newsletters, Delmar, but if someone doesn't and they wanted to, who would they contact?
I can contact Jennifer directly, but if you just create a LibreOne account, you get the newsletter.
Oh, okay.
So everyone who does that, and they have an opt-out option, so we're not going to harass people off of it. But yeah, that's a mechanism where to get. So.
All right. Great. Thank you so much for doing this, and good luck next week. I know you have lots on your plate.
Yeah, it's going to be a busy day, a busy week, that is.
Yeah.
So with that, I'll let you guys go.